Let's start with the ones that made a great living and slowly work our way towards the ones that became multi-millionaires. Number 6. The three-legged man, Franklin Lentini, was born in 1889 in Sicily to parents that were so ashamed of his appearance that they outright refused to raise him. You see, Frank was born with a rare condition known as parasitic twinning, which is when a twin absorbs their siblings' powers in the womb. But in this case, the move backfired and gave him 3 legs and 4 feet. By the age of 5, Frank, who hated his appearance, was placed in a special group home with other disabled children. There, Frank met children with some of the most horrific disabilities imaginable. But one thing stood out to him, something that would forever change his life. He never once heard the children complain about their disabilities, and from that moment on, he swore to do the same. By the young age of 8, Frank was taken to the U.S. and placed in a sideshow as a performer. Frank spent the next 40 years working at the biggest sideshows in the country, from Ringling Brothers Circus to Barnum and Bailey and Buffalo Bill's Wild West, to Barnum and Bailey and Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, becoming one of the most famous and sought-after performers of his time. At his peak, he earned around $500 per week, or around $15,000 in today's money. People raved about his hilarious personality, as he treated his act more like stand-up comedy. He cracked jokes like how he was the only man on the planet who never needed a chair, then sat on his 3rd leg like a stool. He also joked that any time he bought shoes, he obviously had to buy 2 pairs, giving the leftover shoe to his coworker who only had 1 leg. But after 40 years of touring, Frank finally settled down, retired, got married, and had 4 children. After the age of 5, Frank never viewed his disability as a negative, stating many times that we all need to accept what makes us different, as that is what makes us unique, and even calling his deformity his greatest blessing. By the time Frank died in 1966, he had earned over $1 million in today's money and had provided himself and his family with a very comfortable life. Number 5. The Bearded Lady. Annie Jones was born on July 14, 1865, in Virginia. When she was born, her parents were shocked to discover that she was born with facial hair, but the shock quickly wore off when they realized that they had been presented with a rare money-making opportunity. Thankfully, Annie had an entirely normal 9 months of life before her parents handed her off to P.T. Barnum, one of the most prolific American showmen in history. Her family accepted an allowance of $150 per week, making her one of, if not the youngest sideshow performers in history. Annie was born with a condition that caused thick hair to grow around her entire body and face. And by the age of 5, she had a mustache, sideburns, and a beard. She was given the name the Bearded Lady. And for the next 37 years, Annie would remain in the sideshow business, becoming one of the most famous performers in history. As she grew older, she became well known for her gracious manners, sophistication, and her skills with musical instruments, which she played as part of her performance. She made it a priority for people to see that sideshow performers weren't freaks like the media and businessmen had painted them out to be. In the end, Annie would know no other life than that of a touring sideshow performer, traveling across the U.S. and Europe until the day she died. It's estimated that she made anywhere from $1 to $4 million in today's money throughout her career and lived a very comfortable life. Number 4. The original Siamese twins. Chang and Eng Bunker were conjoined twins who lived one of the most fascinating lives you will ever hear about. Born in a small fishing village in modern-day Thailand, they were bought and brought to the U.S. at the age of 17. They were immediately placed in a sideshow, touring across the U.S., Canada, and Europe. But eventually, the brothers created and owned their own show, eliminating the middleman and earning a ton of money. After a decade, the brothers had made enough to retire incredibly wealthy. They became American citizens, bought around 18 slaves, hundreds of acres of land, married 2 sisters, and had 21 children. They were so wealthy that by the 1840s, the brothers' property was the 3rd most valuable in the country. Their families lived in separate houses, which they alternated every 3 days. But here's where things get interesting. The twins' lives were turned upside down when the Civil War began, and by the time it ended, they had lost an enormous amount of their fortune and all of their slaves. To recuperate some of their losses, they began to tour once again. However, this time audiences were reluctant to support them because they had backed the Confederate movement. In their final days, Chang's health had deteriorated and he began to drink heavily. In January 1874, Chang contracted bronchitis and was assigned to bed rest. And on the morning of January 17th, Eng woke up to discover that his brother had died in his sleep. Eng, who was completely healthy, told his family that now that Chang was gone, it was his time to go as well. And within a couple of hours, Eng was dead. Some say that he died from a lack of blood circulation, while others say he died from shock or fright, from seeing his dead twin. The craziest part is if the twins had been born today, surgeons could have easily separated them. In the end, the brothers went from living in poverty to living among the elite as incredibly wealthy men, earning over $4 million and amassing a net worth of over $1.8 million in today's money. Number 3. The Four-Legged Girl. Myrtle Corbin was born on May 12, 1868 in Tennessee. She was born with 2 pelvises and 4 legs, due to a rare form of conjoined twinning. Myrtle's mother began showcasing her daughter by the age of 1, claiming that the money would be used to help fund her education. But by the age of 12, she was placed in a sideshow as a performer under the name the Four-Legged Girl, and very quickly became a star, attracting long lines of people eager to meet and see her. She became so popular that many other sideshows falsely claimed to have four-legged girls as well, only for audiences to discover that they were complete scams. Myrtle's popularity skyrocketed further when she joined P.T. Barnum and later Ringling Brothers, earning $450 per week, or around $14,000 in today's money. She continued performing for roughly 12 years, earning around $4 to $5 million in today's value. Myrtle eventually got married, had 5 children, and retired to live a comfortable and quiet life in Texas with their family until the day she died. She was later buried, and her casket was completely encased in concrete. Several family members stood over the drying concrete until it was fully set to prevent grave robbers from stealing her corpse, since multiple showmen had offered large sums of money for her remains. Number 2. Zip the Pinhead. One of the most famous and misunderstood sideshow performers in history has to be William Henry Johnson, known to the world as Zip the Pinhead. William was born in New Jersey, sometime around 1842, to a very poor African-American family. He was one of 6 children born to parents who were former slaves. He was born with a rare condition that caused him to have a small tapered head, while the rest of his body grew to a normal size. William lived with his family in extreme poverty until the age of 18, when P.T. Barnum discovered him and recruited him into his sideshow known as the greatest show on earth. William was paid $100 a week, but was definitely exploited. He was made to dress in strange outfits, given haircuts to emphasize the shape of his head, and was advertised under headlines like, "What is it?" and "The Missing Link." Then there was his act. He was placed inside a cage where he would violently shake the metal bars and screech at people as they walked by, with the showman describing him as a wild man who only ate raw meat, nuts, and fruits. Surprisingly, He quickly became one of the most famous and popular sideshow performers in history. It wouldn't be until years later that he finally grew tired of being portrayed as a wild animal and only agreed to perform as himself, standing proudly amongst his fellow performers, a choice he stayed true to for the rest of his career. Outside of the sideshow, William was nothing like the character he portrayed in his act. He was described as intelligent, kind, generous, and well-mannered. On one occasion, he even made the news when he dove into the ocean and saved a young girl from drowning. It's estimated that in his 67-year career, he entertained over 100 million people and earned somewhere between $5 to $7 million in today's money, providing a comfortable life for himself and his family, a life they had never known. Number 1. General Tom Thumb. There is no other sideshow performer in history that was more famous or wealthy than Charles Sherwood Stratton, better known as General Tom Thumb. An absolute superstar of his time, Charles Stratton was one of the most famous performers of the 19th century and an international sensation. And with pictures like these, it's incredibly obvious that he farmed his way to the top. But let's start at the beginning. Charles was born on January 4th, 1838 in Connecticut. For the first 6 months of his life, everything seemed normal. But when he was 6 months old, he suddenly stopped growing. And by the age of 1, he was still the exact same size. And by age 5, he had only grown an inch. He was diagnosed with proportionate dwarfism. Around this time, word had spread to P.T. Barnum, and of course, he soon came knocking. After negotiating a deal with Charles's father, he was taken to perform in Barnum's sideshow. Even though Charles was only 5 years old, he was a natural entertainer. His act consisted of dancing, singing impersonations, and comedic performances. His popularity quickly exploded, and the name General Tom Thumb became a household name. Charles was so famous that he couldn't go anywhere in the US or Europe without being mobbed by large crowds. He quickly surpassed any living actor or musician of his time. You see, before Charles came along, freak shows and sideshows were seen as distasteful entertainment. But after his theatrical performances, like his movie-like plays, the culture shifted and the audience began to appreciate the performers as true entertainers. Charles was such a great actor on stage that critics judged him on the merits of a professional entertainer, not as a sideshow performer. Charles was making around $50,000 per year, or around $2 million in today's money, making him one of, if not the highest paid celebrities of his time. His career spanned over 40 years, in which he made over $20 million in today's money. In 1863, Charles's wedding hosted 10,000 guests and became front-page news, eclipsing all articles covering the Civil War for days. In the end, Charles owned many fine homes, including one in the most prestigious neighborhood in New York, a steam yacht, elegant clothing, and several businesses. But on July 15, 1883, at the age of 45, Charles Stratton unexpectedly died of a stroke. News of his untimely death quickly spread across the world. And a few days later, over 20,000 people showed up to his funeral to pay their final respects to a man who entertained millions across the globe. P.T. Barnum, the man who had taken him under his wing at the age of 5, personally paid for his larger-than-life tombstone, representing the impact and legacy he had left behind. And at the very top of it all, standing proudly, a life-size replica of General Tom Thumb. It wouldn't be for another 36 years that he would finally be reunited with his wife, who was laid to rest beside him. She chose her tombstone to simply read his wife.